Hotel night shift workers, what's your creepiest story? I used to work as a banquet server at a Canadian's hotel location. It was usually a pretty standard, high-energy job, but one specific afternoon shift completely changed how I viewed that property. The moment I walked through the employee entrance, the entire lobby and main corridors were absolutely crawling with local police officers. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, and a heavy, uneasy silence hung over the staff. I cautiously tried to ask a couple of officers what was going on, but they just shook their heads and told me they couldn't release any information. It felt like they were actively trying to prevent a mass panic among the guests. During my very next shift, the police were finally gone, so I immediately cornered one of the veteran cleaning staff members to get the real story. What she told me still keeps me up at night. Apparently, a man and a woman had checked into one of the standard rooms around 11 p.m. A few hours later, right around 2 a.m., two more men arrived at the front desk and headed straight up to that exact same room. According to the security footage, all four individuals calmly walked out of the hotel lobby together a couple of hours later. They looked completely fine, normal, and showed absolutely no signs of distress. But when the housekeeping staff opened the door at 11 a.m. for routine checkout cleaning, they walked straight into a literal house of horrors. The entire space was completely soaked in deep crimson. Dark fluids were splattered all over the wallpaper, across the furniture, and pooled heavily on the tile floor. Even worse, the heavy mattress was completely saturated all the way through with fluid. The veteran cleaning lady awkwardly joked that it looked like some sort of bizarre, extreme medical ritual. Since every single registered guest had physically walked out of the building completely unharmed, the police couldn't initiate a standard homicide investigation. There was technically no victim to account for. To this day, I still lay awake wondering about what actually happened inside that space. How could four people walk out on their own 2 feet if that massive amount of vital fluid was lost? Part of me desperately hopes that the cleaning lady was just yanking my chain to freak out the rookie server. But deep down, the absolute dread in her voice told me every single word was real. Cultural note: Canadians is a major commercial hospitality chain based primarily in Manitoba, Canada. Under Canadian law, forensic police units cannot officially classify an incident as a homicide or corporate crime scene without a missing person report or a physical body, leading to instances where severe property damage involving biological materials undergoes standard biohazard remediation rather than criminal prosecution. I used to work at an old heritage hotel that also rented out rooms in a historic house built back in 1864, located just a few blocks away. That place always had a heavy, suffocating energy, and we were all used to the minor activity. Deadbolts on the heavy wooden doors would lock themselves from the inside, and light bulbs would literally unscrew themselves just enough so guests thought they were burnt out. Housekeeping staff constantly reported seeing dark shadows darting across the hallways, and digital alarm clocks would randomly blare in rooms that had been completely empty for weeks. But one morning, right as I opened up the front desk for the early shift, a female guest rushed into the lobby. She looked completely drained, visibly shaking with dark circles under her eyes. I asked her how her stay was, but she was incredibly evasive at first. I gently pressed for details, wanting to make sure any service issue in her room was properly addressed by management. That was when she told me a story that still makes my skin crawl. She had returned to her room around 2 a.m., slightly tipsy after the local bars closed down for the night. She kicked off her high heels, flopped onto the mattress, and closed her eyes. But just as she was drifting off to sleep, the heavy closet door slowly creaked open and banged loudly against the wall. Startled, she got out of bed, walked over, and pushed it firmly closed. A minute later, the door swung open again with a sudden force. Frustrated, she closed it one more time and wedged her shoes tightly under the frame to jam it shut before crawling back into bed, trying to shake off the weird vibe. Just as her mind was drifting back into absolute silence, her shoes literally flew across the room, smashing against the drywall, and the closet door slammed open with terrifying violence. Terrified by the sudden aggression, she grabbed all her belongings in a blind panic, ran to her car, and drove straight to the main hotel lot, choosing to sleep inside her vehicle rather than spending another second in that room. Cultural note: historic preservation laws in the United States protect 19th century structures, prohibiting any alterations to their original materials. By keeping the original timber beams and the dense lath and plaster walls of the era intact, these properties retain a massive, heavy internal acoustic profile and ancient insulation that, according to local researchers, tends to amplify unexplained noises. Something terrifyingly similar happened to me, only I wasn't drunk, nor had I been drinking at all. I was completely sober, which makes the whole experience so much worse. Exhausted after driving a brutal 12-hour stretch on the highway, I finally pulled over and got a room at a local day's inn. The isolation of the road was heavily weighing on me. I absolutely loved the icy cold temperature of the AC, so I fell immediately onto the mattress. I grabbed the crisp sheets, pulled them over my shoulders, and was just relaxing in the dark. Suddenly, I heard a slight, distinct creak echoing through the silence of the room. My mind jumped, thinking I had forgotten to flip the heavy metal deadbolt on the main door. I glanced up, but the front entrance was secure. Instead, I saw the closet door standing wide open, revealing a dark, empty void. Thinking how funny it was that I hadn't noticed it open before, I let out a tired sigh, got up from the bed, and pushed it firmly closed until it clicked. I had just drifted off into a light sleep when another strange noise jolted me awake. I snapped my eyes open, looked around the dim space, and saw that closet door wide open again. Frustrated and wanting some peace, I jumped out of bed and pulled the closet door all the way open. I grabbed my heavy suitcase, wedged it right in front of the frame to lock it into place, and laid back down. I managed to fall asleep for about 30 minutes, but right in the middle of a dead sleep my eyes suddenly popped open, and a severe, inexplicable wave of the heebie-jeebies washed over me. My survival instincts were screaming. I looked around with blurry eyes, and in the far corner of the room, I noticed a pair of men's shoes sticking out from directly under the floor-length drapes. It looked exactly as if someone was hiding right behind them, but strangely, the heavy curtains had no human shape or body imprint to show that a physical intruder was there. Panicked, I jumped up, grabbed my loaded handgun from the nightstand, and aimed it straight at the window. "I have a gun! Don't move, or I'll shoot you!" I yelled into the darkness. Receiving no response, I grabbed one of my boots from the floor and threw it hard at the curtain, aiming right where a human head should be. The boot slammed into the fabric and hit dead air. There was absolutely nothing behind it. That was when I looked down at the floor, and the mysterious shoes had completely disappeared. What the hell? I tried to tell myself that my exhausted brain was just playing cruel tricks on me. I cleared the room, went back to bed, and fell back to sleep, still completely drained from the road. A bit later, something abruptly woke me up again. I didn't have an immediate memory of being scared, just that overwhelming feeling of pure, crushing fatigue. I lay there with my eyes wide open in the dark, Standing directly in the far corner of the room was the solid, pitch-black shadow of a towering man. I let out a sharp gasp, and my heart began racing like crazy as I desperately tried to make out any facial features. But there was nothing, just a dense, shifting blackness. I slowly slid my hand over to my gun, slipped out of the bed sheets and made a run for the main door. But I almost tripped over my own suitcase, which was now laying flat on the floor. I stared down, completely discombobulated. Wait, didn't I open the closet and wedge my heavy suitcase right in front of it? What the hell? Now the closet doors were completely closed. As I stood there shivering, staring at my own terrified reflection in the mirrored doors, I remembered the entity in the corner. I spun around with my weapon raised, ready for a fight. But there was nothing. He was completely gone. I decided right then and there that I had had enough of that specific room. Thankful that I hadn't unpacked a single thing, I grabbed my bags, marched down to the front desk, and demanded a room change. In the new space, I slept just fine. Cultural note: the Days Inn motel chain is one of the most widespread budget lodging franchises along United States highways. Like many other hospitality chains built during the 20th century, automotive boom, these properties feature a standardized room design with direct access from outdoor corridors or parking lots, utilizing mechanical combination locks or magnetic cards for their entryways. My mom used to work as a general manager at a grand castle-like historic hotel. One specific night, she wasn't able to find a babysitter for me on short notice. So there I was, an 11-year-old kid, forced to spend the entire night exploring the labyrinthine back rooms of a completely haunted property. Every old hotel has tons of hidden back alleys, secret corridors, and utility routes. They are designed so the staff can move around quickly and stay completely out of sight. There were narrow dumbwaiters, service lifts, creaky stairs, and winding hallways. They were usually cramped but featured incredibly high ceilings so workers could wheel large laundry racks behind them. Sometimes, you would randomly run into small employee locker rooms or a hidden break area with a mini cafeteria set up. Then, right beyond a completely nondescript wooden door, you would suddenly find yourself standing right beside the luxury royal suite. There was a specific floor about a floor and a half up from the main entry lobby that was entirely dedicated to several massive historic ballrooms. Management rented them out for corporate conventions or high-end weddings. Inside the biggest hall hung a massive, true crystal chandelier powered by actual gas lights. The room featured gorgeous wooden banisters and a classic auditorium layout. The space was grand in the literal sense, huge and breathtaking, with crown molding carved directly from whole pine logs. The entire structure was pushing 150 years old, but it was beautifully oiled, polished, and preserved. Around 11 p.m., my mom was frantically trying to get me out of the way. Late flights were landing at the nearby airport, and business professionals were flooding the desk, needing rooms for early morning meetings. So I decided to go on my own little adventure. I found a cool service way leading straight into the indoor swimming pool area. The night bartender working there was super chill and made me a sweet Shirley Temple drink for free. I skipped off, sipping my drink, and continued exploring the dark service corridors. As I was standing at a dark junction, deciding whether to take a left or a right turn, the silence was shattered by a massive rumbling crash. It sounded like 1,000 fine porcelain dishes smashing onto a hard floor all at once. The noise was so incredibly huge and deep that I couldn't pinpoint the direction. It felt like a whole upper floor had literally collapsed right above me. I was absolutely frightened, But what freaked me out even more was the sudden chaos around me. Tons of staff members streamed out of the break room in complete shock. Security guys were sprinting down the hall, yelling and asking what the hell just happened. Terrified, I ran straight back to the front desk. My mom was waiting there, looking visibly relieved to see that I was completely safe. She told me the sound came from right above her office. In those tense minutes right after, nobody knew if the ceiling had given way or if a massive tree had crashed through the roof. The initial assumption was that the heavy crystal chandelier had finally come loose and plunged to the ground, smashing completely through the top layer of the old pine wood flooring. Suddenly, the front desk console lit up like a Christmas tree. Dozens of frantic calls from guest rooms were flooding the switchboard, with terrified people asking what that horrific noise was. Half of the entire hotel had just been a direct witness to that deafening crash. But as my mom handled the calls, she noticed a truly bizarre detail. No matter what floor the guests were calling from, even the people staying on the absolute top floors, far above the ballrooms, everyone reported the exact same thing. They all claimed the sound was far away, but that it came directly from above them. What the hell? How could a sound come from above the people on the highest floor? Soon, the maintenance crew appeared at the desk. They reported that they had thoroughly searched the entire ballroom floor, and the heavy chandelier was perfectly fine, hanging securely from the ceiling. The main door to the grand ballroom was still deadlocked from the outside. The other banquet rooms were completely undisturbed, with all the chairs and tables secured and untouched. They literally searched every single corner of the property all night long, but they found absolutely nothing. The next morning, the relief manager arrived for her shift, and we explained the chaotic night to her. She just looked at my mom, completely calm. "Oh yeah, that happens here sometimes," she said. "It happened about 20 years ago, too. It woke up the entire building, and security never found a single scratch." She explained that when the hotel was originally being constructed in the 19th century, the massive chandelier fell during the initial installation, completely crushing 4 workers underneath. The local rumor was that the men were literally impaled and pinned to the floor by the sharp, heavy iron filigree. The crew had to use heavy ropes to lift the iron off their bodies. The damaged pine flooring had to be completely replaced, but the chandelier itself was far too expensive to scrap. So the construction company simply hammered the bent iron parts back into place. The exact same fixture that skewered those poor workers still hangs directly above everyone's heads to this day. Sometimes at night, very rarely, the phantom echo of that original fatal crash repeats itself, and everyone freaks the fuck out, every single time. Management officially dismissed it as rogue lightning or natural structural settling, but I still hold fond, creepy memories of that beautiful haunted castle. Cultural note: gaslighting was the predominant illumination system in large buildings and theaters during the second half of the 19th century, prior to the widespread arrival of electrical energy. Due to the complexity of their installations, which required lead or iron piping connected directly to the ceilings, the assembly tasks for these heavy crystal chandeliers involved extreme occupational hazards for Victorian-era workers. I have a good story about this. I used to work as a front desk receptionist for one of the luxury Ritz hotels in Maceió, right on the coast of Brazil. It was a beautiful place, but it carried a dark history that most tourists never knew about. The hotel was supposedly built directly on top of what used to be an old, forgotten cemetery. That is actually why this specific area is called Cruz das Almas, which basically translates to Cross of Souls. I always worked the graveyard shift, starting at 11 p.m. and leaving at 7 a.m. Most nights during the winter were completely dead, so I would just hang out and chat with the bellboy to pass the time. He played some acoustic guitar, so he used to sit on the marble stairs right in front of the reception desk and just strum some chords for a while. Other times, I would just surf the web and grab a late-night bite from the kitchen. Things only got crazy during the summer peak season. Since flights after midnight are way cheaper, it was totally normal to get slammed with 40 to 60 intense check-ins all at once around 3:45 a.m. But during the winter months, the hotel returned to its regular eerie quietude. You could hear a pin drop in that massive lobby, and the silence often played tricks on your mind. One particular night, I had just finished auditing and closing the day's financial income. It had been an incredibly calm shift, so the general manager had already gone home for the night. In his absence, I was the one completely in charge of the entire property. The bellboy and I were standing behind the long reception desk, just talking about random stuff in the dim light. Suddenly, this massive, deafening crash shattered the silence of the lobby. It sounded like hundreds of fine wine glasses had fallen and smashed into pieces on the hard floor. The sound was so violent and close that we instantly stopped talking and just stared at each other, paralyzed. My heart started racing as the echo faded into the walls. A second later, the kitchen staff radioed the front desk, asking in a panicked voice if we had heard that massive crash. We told them we did, and that we were looking into it. Right after that, the security team called the desk, completely freaked out by the noise. I immediately used my radio to order every staff member on duty to abandon their posts and search for the source. The hotel has a very classic design, filled with massive wooden cupboards and heavy crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings. We checked every single corner, every hallway, and every room. But we never found a single thing. There wasn't even the tiniest piece of broken glass anywhere on the floor, just the freezing air and the crushing silence of the old cemetery below us. Cultural note: Maceió is a coastal city in northeastern Brazil, known for its dramatic urban growth in areas with complex colonial histories. The neighborhood of Cruz das Almas historically carried this name due to ancient burial grounds and roadside memorials, a factor that frequently inspires local urban legends regarding modern infrastructure built over old foundations. Something similar happened to me, and it was one of two strange things I remember from a local hotel where I used to work. I used to handle the late afternoon and evening shifts at the front desk of that property. It wasn't an overtly terrifying place, but it had a few routine anomalies that kept the entire staff on edge. First, there was an incident that wasn't entirely supernatural, but it did give me a massive scare during a night shift. Later on, I ended up covering the final hours of the second shift, pushing deep into the quiet midnight transition. The hotel was dead silent, so I was watching the original movie Halloween on the lobby TV. Right as the tension in the movie was building up, a massive, echoing crash shattered the silence from the far end of the north corridor. My heart jumped straight into my throat. I didn't see anything from the desk, so I immediately grabbed a heavy metal maglite flashlight for protection and stepped into the darkness. Right as I took my first few steps toward the source of the noise, the iconic high-pitched theme song from the movie started to echo loudly down the empty hallway. I felt a suffocating tension that completely paralyzed me in the darkness. It turned out to be a heavy commercial light fixture that had completely detached from the ceiling, smashing flat against the tile floor. Luckily, there were no real serial killers waiting for me in the dark. On the other hand, the most consistent, creepy occurrence happened between the lobby and the main laundry facility. The housekeepers were absolutely terrified of going into that back room alone. There was a heavy leather couch positioned in the center of the main lobby. In the laundry room, management had set up an old CRT television monitor connected to a security camera facing that exact seating area. Sometimes, when you were folding sheets and casually glanced at the screen, you would see a distinct figure sitting right there on the couch. It wasn't a glitch, and it wasn't a trick of the light. It was a dark, solid silhouette of a man just resting his arms, completely motionless. But whenever you walked out to check the actual lobby, the leather couch was completely empty. I tried to shake it off as a lens anomaly, but the physical dread it gave the girls was very real. Like what you see? Subscribe to the Reddit Oracle for more. I used to work the graveyard shift at a small, isolated hotel. It was a pretty quiet gig, but from 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. I was completely on my own with zero backup. I distinctly remember working on Christmas night back in 2008. The property was entirely dead. There wasn't a single guest checked in, and it was literally just me alone in the dark all night. Around 3 a.m., I was sitting in the back office, bored out of my mind and just browsing the web on the old office PC to keep myself awake. That was when the CCTV live feed from the hotel bar caught my eye. My heart skipped a beat. On the monitor, there seemed to be a transparent white figure floating right in the middle of the room, almost dancing and waving directly at the camera lens. Now, I have never believed in the paranormal, but I have always been absolutely terrified of it. I always assumed that if I ever found myself in a situation like this, I would just nope the fuck out of there immediately. However, for some strange reason, a sudden impulse hit me. I instantly decided that I needed to go out there and check it out myself. Every single ghost story seems to conclude with someone running away in a panic or hiding under a desk, never actually attempting to verify what they saw, and I just didn't want to be that guy. So I gripped my flashlight, walked out into the pitch-black bar and shined the beam around. Sure enough, there was absolutely nothing standing where I had just seen the ghostly apparition. But I wasn't going to just accept that and walk away. I pulled over a heavy wooden bar stool, climbed on top of it, and reached up to inspect the security camera that had caught the figure. And right there the mystery was solved. A tiny piece of loose white thread was caught directly on the edge of the camera lens, being blown around by the air conditioning unit in a continuous dancing motion. Because the thread was positioned so incredibly close to the camera's focus point, it came through on the security monitor as a blurry, transparent anomaly. It looked exactly like a floating spirit. I remember thinking at that exact moment that if I had uploaded that raw footage to YouTube, millions of people would have sworn it was definitive proof of a ghost. And that is exactly how a non-believer in the paranormal became an even stronger skeptic. I still love spooky things, but now I always look for the air conditioner first. Cultural note. Closed-circuit television cameras from the late 2000s utilized fixed focal lenses with standard infrared illumination for night vision. When microscopic debris, spiderwebs, or textile fibers drift within the immediate focal plane of these sensors, the infrared light reflects intensely off the object, creating an optical illusion known in security sectors as a backscatter artifact or artifact ghost. I used to work the graveyard shift as a night auditor at the front desk of a First Nations resort, keeping watch from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. While I never personally faced anything too crazy, Room 104 had a notorious reputation among the staff for some truly bizarre occurrences. I was pretty close with one of the veteran housekeepers who had been there for years. She told me about this one particular night during the dead winter off-season when the entire property was practically empty. only a handful of guests were registered, and management had placed all of them way up on the second and third floors. The entire ground floor was completely deserted, dark and freezing cold. She was doing her routine rounds, walking down the long, narrow first-floor corridor. But just as she brushed past the door of room 104, the heavy silence was shattered by the sharp, sudden ring of the landline phone inside. Confused, she stopped in her tracks. She pulled out her physical room status list to double-check, and sure enough, room 104 was clearly marked as unoccupied. She figured maybe a last-minute walk-in guest with a pet had slipped past the desk and checked in without her noticing. She walked back to the front desk to confirm the system status with the agent. But the agent just shook his head. No new guests had arrived, and he definitely hadn't dialed that room. They shrugged it off, assuming it was just a random outside misdial, and she went back to her evening checks. Hours later, deep into the night, she was walking down that same ground floor hallway again, starting from the far end. That was when she heard it, a faint, rhythmic ringing echoing through the shadows. As she kept walking, passing room 107, then 106, and 105, the distant ringing continued to grow louder, guiding her straight toward the exact same spot. She stopped right outside room 104. She leaned in, holding her breath, and listened closely. The very second her shadow covered the doorframe, the ringing stopped instantly. At this point, there wasn't a single soul awake in that massive resort except for her and the front desk guy. Annoyed, she grabbed the wall phone in the hallway and called the desk, pissed off that he was playing a sick joke on her. But nobody picked up. It turned out the agent had been outside on a smoke break for the last 10 minutes, leaving the desk completely empty. I still shudder every time I think about what was on the other end of that line. Cultural note: First Nations resorts in Canada and tribal lands in the United States are often located on culturally significant heritage grounds. Due to their unique geographic isolation and proximity to ancestral territories, these properties frequently find themselves at the center of local folklore regarding unexplained auditory phenomena and electronic anomalies. I usually tell people that working around these old properties exposes you to some pretty unexplainable things. I physically witnessed something myself during a shift, and to this day, I can't find a logical explanation for it. I was walking down the lower corridor toward an open doorway. Out of nowhere, I saw a figure pass by from left to right, moving quickly into the back rooms. It instantly freaked me out because it was a remarkably tall, solid, dark silhouette. My mind tried to process, but I just couldn't place which member of the staff it could possibly be. I walked through the door anyway to grab some clean supplies from a nearby utility trolley. I heard the distinct, heavy sound of metal beer barrels shifting and scraping against the concrete below. Knowing the sound came from the cellar, I assumed the figure was just a coworker inventorying the stock. I thought nothing of it, and decided to head down there. After a minute, I stepped into the dim, cold air of the cellar. I wanted to play a little prank, so I called out in a joking way, "Who's messing about down here?" I fully expected to catch them off guard and make them jump, if you know what I mean. I walked deeper into the storage room, but my smile instantly faded. There was absolutely no one there. The room was freezing, and there was no other exit or access point anywhere in the cellar except for the exact doorway I was standing in. When people say the tiny hairs on the back of your neck go straight up when you're terrified, they are definitely not wrong. The pure dread in that room was suffocating. Cultural note: subterranean storage spaces and historic beer cellars in older European and British hospitality properties were typically constructed with thick stone masonry and dead-end layouts for temperature optimization. Due to their deep underground positioning and heavy insulation, these structural areas are highly prone to acoustic reflections, making them common locations for reported auditory illusions. I used to run a local hostel that was converted from a massive old Victorian mansion. The place had a beautiful exterior, but the basement was completely, undeniably haunted. It was so active that it didn't even need to be the dead of night for the entities to come out and play. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere was present 24/7. For instance, you could frequently see a pair of pale, motionless feet inside the men's washroom stall. But whenever you knocked or pushed the door open, the stall was completely empty. But the worst part happened during my late night shifts. A tall, solid, dark figure absolutely loved to watch me while I was cleaning the kitchen in the pitch black. It would constantly prank me by abruptly shutting off my music. Every time it happened, a freezing, threatening dark presence would wash over my entire body, paralyzing me with dread. It wasn't just my imagination playing tricks on me either. Dozens of temporary guests and new staff members complained about intense ghostly activity during their stays. They had absolutely no previous knowledge of the mansion's dark history, yet they would routinely describe the exact same terrifying experiences down to the smallest detail. Eventually, I let a local professional paranormal investigation team film an official episode for their regional TV show inside the property to document the anomalies. But the absolute spookiest part of my story happened after I finally quit the hospitality business. I moved into a house nearby, thinking I was finally free. For about an entire year after I left that mansion, those same attachments would routinely visit my new home, waking me up in a cold sweat. They don't come around anymore. It took me several months and multiple spiritual blessings to finally protect my space and completely get rid of them. Cultural note: Victorian architecture mansions were primarily built during the 19th century in Anglo-Saxon regions. Today, many of these properties have been listed as protected heritage, which forces new owners to maintain the original basements and room layouts of the era if they wish to operate them as hospitality businesses or tourist accommodations. I work night audit at an extended stay hotel that mostly caters to business professionals and displaced families. It is usually a pretty quiet, routine environment, and I had only ever been truly creeped out once in my entire career. Around 4 a.m., I suddenly had to use the restroom. To get to the employee bathroom, you have to pass directly through the main commercial kitchen. I pushed the heavy door open and took a few cautious steps into total suffocating darkness. All of our lights are motion activated, and the kitchen sensors are notorious for not working right away. Usually, you can fix this by casually flailing your arms around as you walk, just hoping you don't accidentally smack your knuckles against a stainless steel cabinet. But the moment I stepped into that pitch blackness, my whole body went rigid. I could distinctly sense something standing right in there with me, only a few feet away in the dark. I froze instantly. Every single survival instinct I had was screaming at me that I was not alone. I've passed through this exact kitchen several times a night, every single night for a few years. I've done it in complete darkness before, and I had never felt off or panicked in any way. But this time, I could physically feel a heavy presence lurking in the kitchen hallway. It was completely hidden from my view, just subtly shifting in the darkness beyond whatever qualified as sight in that empty space. I couldn't bring myself to start waving my arms around to trigger the sensors. I was utterly paralyzed by the fear of taking another step and running straight into whatever was waiting in there with me. Slowly, carefully, I began to back away. I pushed the heavy door open with my back, and stepped out into the safety of the brightly lit dining area. As the ambient light briefly illuminated the kitchen layout, I stared into the room and saw absolutely nothing. But I knew there were plenty of deep blind spots where the thing could have easily slinked away too. I've worked late shifts for years, and you usually get pretty desensitized to weird nonsense going on. Situations that would completely rattle the day shift workers just make me think, oh, it must be a Wednesday. But I've looked back on this specific night, and I keep asking myself why I didn't just turn on my phone's flashlight to check for an intruder or a curious guest. The truth is, I simply couldn't do it at the time. I just went back to my desk and tried to convince myself it was absolutely nothing, and to be clear, I'm almost positive it was just my mind playing tricks. But it's one thing if I were the paranoid type who jumps at my own shadow. I'm not. This one time, out of nowhere, my gut told me I wasn't alone in that kitchen and that I shouldn't push my luck. I didn't typically cover the deep graveyard shifts, mostly working the busy days and late evenings, but our boutique hotel had this one specific guest room that frequently called the front desk. Management intentionally kept that room unbooked and locked down on purpose due to structural renovations. It was always completely empty, dark, and stripped of furniture. Yet, like clockwork, at least once a day, the desk console would light up with that specific room number. When you picked up the receiver, there would be nothing but a dense, freezing silence on the line before the call abruptly ended. The daily occurrence got so incredibly unnerving that the front desk staff actually established a rotating system. Everyone would take turns answering when that empty room called, just to be fair, and share the dread. Later on, I moved to a different property, an extremely high-end luxury hotel where all of the lobby and office furniture had been carefully sourced from private historic estate sales. We had this one particular oil painting hanging in the main study that was notorious for completely freaking out new employees. No one could ever describe what exactly was wrong with it. They just absolutely hated closing down that room at the end of the night by themselves. Whenever you stepped inside to lock up, you just never felt alone. The painting depicted a stern woman from at least a century ago, and you could just tell from her gaze that she wasn't quite done with the living world. That property also suffered from a bizarre amount of sudden electrical malfunctions. Digital reservation appointments would literally delete themselves right in front of your eyes on the monitor. It happened so often that other departments would call the front desk in a panic, asking if someone else had just witnessed the data vanish into thin air. So yeah, those are just a few of my real experiences in the industry. Cultural note: estate liquidation sales, known in Anglo-Saxon regions as estate sales, are regulated commercial events where all assets, artwork, and physical furniture belonging to a recently deceased person are publicly auctioned with the purpose of settling debts or distributing the inheritance among legal heirs. Let me preface this story by saying that I don't believe in ghosts. I have always been a complete skeptic, but this experience is one of two instances in my life that made me seriously question everything. When I was 18, I was traveling abroad in New Zealand and picked up a job as a night porter at a pretty fancy high-end hotel. I was young, eager to earn some cash, and didn't mind the isolation. Most of the shifts I was given were grueling graveyard shifts, working from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. During those long hours, it was just me and the front desk manager running the entire property. There were usually 0 late check-ins, so the majority of my nightly routine involved room service requests, early morning newspaper delivery, ground security, and driving guests to and from the airport. As the sole porter on duty, I had to do regular security rounds inside and outside the building to make sure everything was in order and no unauthorized people were slipping into the premises. Part of my checklist was locking up various common rooms after curfew. This included deep cleaning and securing the detached pool house at exactly 10 p.m., after which only management or I had key access. At around 3 a.m., I had my first scheduled group to drop off at the airport terminal. The drive was short, and the chilly night air was keeping me alert behind the wheel. When I arrived back at the property, I drove down the long, dark driveway toward the loop turnaround near the pool house so I could perfectly position the shuttle van right outside the main entrance. The pool house featured massive glass walls from floor to ceiling. As I swung the van around, my bright high beams blared directly through the glass windows, illuminating the dark interior. My heart instantly stopped. Standing right on the slick edge of the water was an older man with his hands placed firmly on his hips. He was completely shirtless, his bare back facing the driveway, looking like he was just about to dive into the deep end. I felt a sudden wave of confusion and irritation hit me. I had locked that building myself and drawn the heavy safety cover over the pool. I parked the van, grabbed my master keys, and marched straight to the entrance, ready to scold a stubborn guest. I unlocked the heavy door and stepped inside, clicking my flashlight on. To my absolute surprise, the room was freezing, and everything was exactly as I had left it. The pool cover was securely fastened, the interior lights were dead, and every single emergency exit was completely locked from the inside. There was no one there. I locked up again, my skin crawling, and walked straight to the front desk to tell the manager what I had just seen. He just shrugged casually and looked at me. "Oh yeah, that's Ethel. He comes around every now and then. He was a regular guest a few years back but died in his sleep while checked into his room." The manager explained that one of the housekeeping girls had found him. He hadn't mentioned it before because it didn't seem important until I saw him standing by the water. Apparently, multiple staff members had witnessed Ethel wandering around the grounds long after his passing. He just couldn't seem to leave the property behind. I already felt uneasy delivering the morning papers through those dim corridors, especially on the isolated fourth floor where he had passed away. After that night, my graveyard shifts were never the same. Cultural note: high-end resorts in New Zealand frequently utilize thermal or indoor pool enclosures with floor-to-ceiling glass to maintain temperature control against coastal winds. In the hospitality industry, strict curfews and automated pool covers are standard safety protocols to prevent accidental drowning during unmonitored graveyard shifts. This isn't my personal story, but it was passed down to me by an elderly colleague at a historic hotel where I used to work. This old chap, Mike, regularly covered the lonely graveyard shift. His nightly routine mostly consisted of reading paperbacks, doing the hourly property walkover, and handling the rare late-night room service request. The hotel, located deep in the countryside of Wales, is well over 300 years old. It was originally constructed right around the ruins of an ancient castle watchtower. Because of its extreme age, the entire structure creaks like a total bastard. Even if a stray cat casually walks through an empty room, the floorboards groan under the weight. Mike told me that during the quietest hours, he used to sit directly in front of the lobby fireplace, loosen his uniform tie, and just immerse himself in a book. He always knew if a guest was coming down the main staircase because the impossibly loud, unavoidable creaking of the timber would echo through the walls. Over the years, he became so accustomed to the structural acoustics that he could map out a guest's descent without looking. He knew exactly that there were 12 distinct creaks before someone reached the bottom. He was so deeply synced with the timing that he would slowly sit up in his armchair on the fourth creak of the steps, and casually tighten his tie on about the 8th. By the 10th creak, he was already standing straight right by the office door, putting on his professional smile and waiting to warmly greet the guest. But one freezing night, the pattern broke. He sat reading in the absolute silence of the early hours when the footsteps started. He counted the creaks in his mind, just as he always did. 1, 2, 3, he sat up. 7, 8, he fixed his uniform tie. 9, 10, he stood straight right by the office door. Then he clearly heard the heavy 11th creak, and then absolute, suffocating silence. Nothing else followed. He waited in the dim light for a couple of agonizing seconds, expecting to see a tired guest just standing still on the penultimate step. Finally, he poked his head around the wooden door frame to check. The old staircase was completely empty. There was absolutely nobody there. He realized the unlatched door at the top hadn't even been opened. Sure, there's every logical possibility that Mike had briefly nodded off and was just dreaming, or that the intense graveyard tiredness was playing tricks on his mind. But when you are alone inside a 300-year-old fortress in the middle of the night, those wooden echoes are enough to terrify any young porter. Cultural note: historic coaching inns and hotels built around medieval fortifications in Wales often feature staircases made of green oak or reclaimed ship timber. Due to centuries of shifting foundations and atmospheric humidity, these materials expand and contract unpredictably, creating distinct structural acoustics that are frequently featured in local British ghost lore. If you like these stories, make sure to subscribe to the Reddit Oracle.